Today I'm going to present book chapter called The Historical and Structural Context of Public Policy Making. It is a book chapter by Thomas A. Birkland and it is unit from an introduction to public policy making book. Without wasting much time, I am straightly moving in the main content of today's presentation. Actually, this book is about mostly in the context of American policy making. That's why not to think about in a bit different context, in global context, rather than focusing in only American context. That's why what I have tried to do here is I have tried to put some my observations on policy making in case of global context. Since as you all are aware that I come from political science background, that's why we have to study like different political system of different parts of the world. I have done particularly like comparative study of America, France, Britain, Switzerland, similarly Japan, China. That's why I have used that little bit knowledge here. I am not referred particular source here because I have just put this all in my very common knowledge, based on common knowledge. What are the major factors which affect public policy? And in my observation, political change is one of the main factors which can be observed in the context of Nepal, our immediate two neighbors, India and China also. In case of Nepal, I didn't have to explain much because what happened after 1990s democratic movement, that our monarchy shrink to great extent, which used to like exercise power to great extent, and the state had the policy a bit like state control type of policy. After that what happened is we saw a bit liberal kind of political system and policies were formed accordingly, like private institutions were like developed, and similarly other like country took the policy of liberal economic policy. So in this way political change causes policy changes, and that applies after the peace process also, because when interim constitution of 2007 and constitution of 2015 are adopted, after that also we have seen different policies in the line of political change. And after that, in case of India also, if we talk, when India became independent, after that Nehru came in power, who is the longest serving Prime Minister of India and is considered as one of the most powerful Prime Minister also. He pursued the path of like mixing democratic and socialist components in his program. That's why he formed accordingly the all state policies in his leadership. After that, in 1991, when P.V. Narsingh Rao was Prime Minister, then later became Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was Finance Minister, and they shifted India's like economic policy towards completely liberal economic policy. In this way, in India also we can see that how political changes cause policy changes. Similarly, if we talk about our next neighbor China, Mao came in power by a violent political war, and he changed to great extent policy of China after he came in power in 1950s, replacing all the policies formed by the nationalist government. And after that, in 1980s, after death of Mao, Deng Xiaoping came in power, and he moved China towards a very like economic state but politically controlled. That is communist type of economics model, which is known in world economy as a different stream. After that, end of Cold War, we can consider another like example. I have included it under the title of international atmosphere because this is also one cause of like policy change. Similarly, war. We can see like how war changes the state's policy. It applies in case of many countries after Second World War, because in Second World War some countries won, some countries lost. For example, Japan lost, and what happened in case of Japan is its constitution was imposed by USA, one of the winning country, and its article 9, which still prevails, doesn't allow to have its own army. That's why Japan's army is called defense army instead of army like in our sovereign countries. Similarly, constitutional provision relating to this I'll come in a bit in detail. These international treaties and agreements also I have discussed a lot in the past. Actually, you can take example of for example Cairo Conference, ICPD, which caused in case of our Nepal also to form a different ministry of environment. In this way, this policy and similarly other like some laws, in this way international agreements are also major like factor of policy changes. And similarly, we can consider UN Charter, which influences to great extent to form particularly civil and political rights of civilians of different countries. Now I want to come to this chapter. I brought little bit global policy formation process and its what factors influence it. After that, I want to come in this chapter where author has discussed about policy formation in context of USA. Before entering to the main topics, I want to go in brief overview of US history. 1787 new constitution was introduced. After that, in 1788 it was ratified. In 1789 it was implemented. But before that, it was ruled by British, French, Spanish, like Dutch and powerful nations then used to be. And after that, the constitution which was adopted then is existing till now. That's why it is one of the longest living constitution of the world, and it's basically based on the principle of separation of power, which I will be discussing later on. Now I just want to go through the phases of constitutional order. As I have mentioned in earlier presentation also, constitution is the supreme policy of any nation. That's why it influences every policy, public policy, national policy and all kinds of policies. That's why we need to know it very well, that how it is developed and how it is progressed. And in case of USA's constitutional order, if we see it a bit meticulously and in author's view particularly, it has 4 phases, that is divided power, state activism, national activism and national standards. This divided power basically means what happened is when USA's new constitution was adopted, then union was formed by different states, particularly 13 states. And then founder fathers, who are known often as the leaders who fought for freedom of USA, didn't have much idea how, to what extent power should be distributed among states and federation or the central government, we say generally. There was some kind of discussion going on what kind of power should be exercised by federation and what kind of power should be exercised by states. And generally, being a political science student also, I generally say this as vertical power division, but there is horizontal power division also, which I will be discussing later. Particularly, it is known as by the terms like separation of power and like that. And after that, another phase is state activism. That means states were active in this period. State means now there are some 50 states in USA and then it used to be 13 states. How they became active, author has discussed in this title about that. And this period extends from 1870 to 1933, and this is the era of great industrialization of USA. That's why there are many industrial outputs and many jobs were created. And USA was known in this period as a powerful nation in international politics, international arena. After that, national activism. What happened is 1929 is there was a Great Depression. After that, followed by that, there was World War. Followed by that, there was Cold War. Because of that, again, states' power little bit shifted towards nation, federation, the central government. That's why author has discussed about that. And after that, national standards. After 1961 to present, in author's view, that national standards prevails. That according to that, now it's not about state versus federation. It's about how we can treat all citizens of USA with equal standard of living. So this is the main idea of that. After that, here is a question mark with a title End of Big Government. What it is basically indicating is that federal government's role has been cut out, particularly by Ronald Reagan when he was president. Though it was initiated by Jimmy Carter also, that was not much successful. But Ronald Reagan is the one who is known for this. And after that, it is questionable because, for example, in case of Barack Obama, in first decade of 21st century, there was depression. Because of that, whether we should say this role of big government is really cut. Have USA gone towards the concept of small government? That's why it is question mark there. After that, I want to briefly come towards this power separation theory, which is the basic principle of any democratic system, and it is very relevant for policy making. Legislative, which we generally say legislative body as parliament. USA has 2 bodies. One is House of Representatives, lower house, which is known like ours. Upper house is known as Senate there, whose role is to make law. After that, executive, that is head of the government. Since America is presidential system and our system is British system, basically originally it's prime ministerial system. So in executive system in USA, what happens is the laws are enforced or implemented by president and his cabinet. And in state level there are governors who execute the laws, and after that judiciary interprets the laws. And there are different instances which probably I cannot present here because of time limitation, but there are different examples of how judiciary interprets law, and that turns out to be law for long term. And after that, what are the basis of public policy formation? Public demand, demonstrated need, unfairness, combination of these factors. These are very common factors, that's why I don't want to go on them in detail. After that, I want to move in the next slide. This is particularly USA's policy making, what is the motivating factor of USA's policy formation? Because we have this problem, we have problem of stability in case of ours, and many countries in the world are facing this problem, but USA has very distinct feature in this matter. They have stability, particularly presidents at least serve one term, that is 4 years, and many of them have served 2 terms, that means 8 years. Up to 8 years one president can plan his programs and execute that. That's why there is very much stability, and they are termed by author in 4 ways. Ideological stability, there is no any ideological divide like we have Democrat versus communist or anything like that. And they have political parties, they do politics, but there are two political parties, they have 2 ideas, and they just go through election process, which is approved by people, they rule for their term, and after that another comes in power by the same process. But here we have very different scenario if we compare in our context. Political stability, I just mentioned, often the presidents serve full terms. And after that, policy stability, and policies also are stable there. Like in case of our, what happens is, because of political reason one policy is introduced, that becomes either replaced by another policy when the government changes, or becomes ineffective. And another is power stability. This is also defined by constitution, like who should exercise what kind of power, and that is very thoroughly practiced. Yes, sir.
Because of the lack of those 4 points,
yes, sir,
our policy making process and policy implementation process are very weak. We can generalize in our country.
Yes, sir. This is my last slide, and here I have taken some concluding remarks from American policy making experience, but it is not mine itself actually, which I have drawn for his perspective. I have not put my thought on it much because it is very clearly mentioned there. And the first principle or the main foundation of American policy making is value of individual liberty. They highly value the individual liberty. They whether that is state government or federal government, they rarely make any laws which shrinks individuals' liberty. Stability, that is one of the main factor, because of that US policies are very long living and very effective also. And another is remarkable change. This is very important because in 1787, yes, Madanji.
What is the difference between remarkable stability and simply plain stability?
Okay, Madanji, thank you very much. Remarkable stability, why it is saying that is, stability of government means one term. We have not seen that after 1990s. I was expecting KP Oli to fulfill his term like short full term. If we say, if KP Oli had served 5 years, we would say, okay, this KP Oli's government was stable. That means for a short period of time. But here it is said remarkable because George Washington was the first president, he served 8 years. After that, there are many presidents who served twice or at least 4 years. There is no single case where president was outstayed like in our case because of this mathematics of politics. Okay, that's why it is very stable. That is political stability. Another stability is ideological stability. We don't see any political situation where political parties are like mushrooming. In our case, like how many political parties are here, we don't know. But there are always 2 or 3 major political parties. In case of Britain also that happens, and that is existing since long. That's why, Madanji, probably it is termed as remarkable stability. And another change is also remarkable because in less than a century we have seen 6-7 constitutions in case of ours, and there are many countries in the world where constitutions keep on changing. But in case of USA, there are many amendments, but it hasn't changed till now. Constitution is not replaced till now. That's why that constitution has remarkable change within it. For example, probably Roshniji or Sardaji were talking about like civil rights movements. Yeah, civil rights movements which happened in 1970s. Actually, that was the movement of blacks to make laws in favor of them. Before that, there was in 1960, in the 70s of like 19th century also, there was civil war. There was whole war between like northern states or federal government and southern states because of the slavery issue, but still constitution didn't change. They solved the issues within that constitution. That's why it is that the policy making of USA considered as with a remarkable change. And another is, they always, what author has mentioned is, they always think about or like consider about room for improvement within the policy system or within like constitution. They don't think that okay, this is the final thing what we have done and we cannot go ahead of that. They always are flexible to improve. That is another observation of author. And another is theory of power of balance. Actually, I have talked about separation of power, or there are power balancing theory also. But actually, this principle comes from Greek city-states, and I have compared how it prevails in the context of USA and France. That's why actually this power balance theory, actually we have also here. For example, we have also legislature, executive, and similarly Supreme Court. I mean, as a judiciary, the supreme institution of judiciary. And these all work together to balance each other. This is the basic concept of that, and they have really practiced there. In case of USA, they don't have much like surpassing one's jurisdiction. We generally say Sardaji is lawyer here. What role or like responsibility one is given? Yes. Yes. There are many scholars. Sardaji, actually, James Madison, who is the fourth president of USA also, he was the drafter of US Constitution. He has defined, and similarly Montesquieu is considered as one of the great thinker in this matter. Similarly John Locke there is, okay, and there are many others who have interpreted their principles. So this actually this theory prevails everywhere in the world, living like countries like North Korea, where power is centralized in single leader. And there are other, like in case of Hitler also, that was not practiced because all three organs were centralized on that personality who used to be dictator. But in other cases, like in mostly in democratic countries, it is followed. Another important feature of American policy making is role of Supreme Court. It is very crucial. Sometimes it has been debatable also, but what it has done is basically it has facilitate the role of executive and legislature. For example, there are certain examples given. For example, one example is Barron versus Baltimore. That is about whether states should make some laws which violates individuals' rights or not. Author had discussed about like that. Similarly, there are other laws also. Supreme Court interpreted that turned out to be law, and that was practiced for a long time, that survived for a long time. That is the difference between us or many of the other countries and USA. And the last point is restraint. Actually, this is very new concept for me because I have not thought from this perspective. Being a political science student, we used to discuss much about theory of power balance, but there is a concept of restraint by this author, Birkland. What he has said is actually American policy making is slow and restrained in its nature, because so that political parties or particularly government takes, and also lawmakers like senators and house of members of House of Representatives take a lot of time to think on that, so that it won't be debatable later on, or it won't be like problem later on. Government proposes a law, after that House of Representative approves it, then it is sent in Senate, and Senate also has right to take its position, and after that long process it is accepted as law. And that is what author argues is that is deliberately made like this. Here I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you everyone for your patience to hear me.